Hi folks, welcome to the lecture on constructivism, or social constructivism. Constructivism is probably the more correct term. And so here we're going to talk about theories that believe that most of what is important in the world is socially constructed. Right? It is a construct of social interaction. And in this lecture, I'm only really going to tackle standard conservative constructivism rather than post-structural stuff that we'll cover in a later lecture. All of which you will understand better by the end of this lecture. Okay, so we looked at the different ideas of order in the English school lecture, in the last lecture, and the English school's idea, their contribution, their new idea was that just because we are in an anarchical system, right? So there's no higher power, doesn't mean that the world is in chaos, because with the interactions between states, over time you have some unwritten rules, some social institutions. This is the way things are done, and this is acceptable behavior, and this is not acceptable behavior. Those social constructs, those social rules, those unwritten rules, come to create some sense of order in the world. Right? So the English school does believe that reality is socially constructed, or at least how we interpret reality is socially constructed. And the English school, I think, is the least socially constructivist theory, because it believes that these constructions change very, very slowly. And so for all intents and purposes, you can take them as fixed. Whereas as we move to the right, standard conservative constructivism also thinks things are quite fixed and only change reasonably slowly. But then in a later lecture, we'll cover post-structuralism, which is everything all the time is being debated and fought over and socially constructed and can be changed very quickly. Okay. Now you'll remember the clip I played you of the golden balls, right? And we worked out the winning strategy, right? So the winning strategy really comes from the idea that it's a prisoner's dilemma, and the prisoner's dilemma is a game theory style of illustrating the problems of cooperation, right? And so the winning strategy was always to defect, or to betray your partner, or to steal, right? That is the point of a prisoner's dilemma, that whatever they do, you are better off betraying them. So if they split, then you're better off stealing, and if they steal, you're better off stealing. So everyone's rational action ends up with us in the worst possible place, right? And if you take this for, say, an arms agreement, right? What is the most rational course for the US and Russia? Is for both of them to defect from this this arms agreement, right? And then you end up, the most rational course for both takes them to the worst possible place, right? So the prisoner's dilemma is a way of codifying this, of putting it into a payoff matrix and showing that this is the real problem, that we can't read each other's minds, we can't be completely sure of the other person's intentions, even if they tell us they are not going to defect. That's just what a liar would say, right? So there's really no way to be certain of other people's intentions. So the neoliberal the neoliberals' solution for this problem is to put the two prisoners in the same room so that they can hear each other's answers. So that fits in with the analogy, the story of the prisoner's dilemma. But in real life, what it means is that there is no trust. There's only verification, right? So you build an infrastructure of, or an institution of inspections, right? So that there is no trust. It's purely just verification. So you can't be surprised, like the poor gentleman on the left, because we can't be entirely sure of other people's intentions, and if we allow a situation where cheating will be rewarded, you can almost guarantee that that's going to happen, right? So we have to build these social constructs, these organizations, these institutions to verify things, and that can change the incentives away from a prisoner's dilemma. So instead of ending up in the bottom right where both get zero, we can end up in the top left where we share the benefits of peace, or whatever it is, trade, etc. However, the solution that the social constructivists say, their idea is that it's very context dependent, that hardly anything is happening on purely, rational game theory calculations of benefits and potential for being betrayed. To illustrate this, what if this competition wasn't just two strangers? What if it was a mother and a daughter? Right? What if it was a mother and a daughter playing? You could almost guarantee that they would split, right? Or they've worked out beforehand that the daughter will get it all, and or whatever. But the relationship there would mean that it would be inappropriate for them to both steal. And that's the social constructivists' key point, is that there are all these unwritten rules that control our actions, and they control it based on what is appropriate for the relationship. So the relationship or the logic of appropriateness works between states too, and almost certainly the most famous social constructivist paper in international relations is by a gentleman called Alexander Wendt, and he wrote an article with the title of "Anarchy is What States Make of It." Right. So instead of anarchy being just a prisoner's dilemma, it's what states make of it. It's what states socially construct out of it. So I've got a reasonably long quote from his article that I just want to read to you. I've got it over 3 slides, but let me read this to you. Would we assume a priori, so that means before any evidence one way or the other, would we assume that we were about to be attacked if we were ever contacted by members of an alien civilization? I think not. We would be highly alert, of course, but whether we placed our military forces on alert or launched an attack would depend on how we interpreted the import of their first gesture for our security, if only to avoid making an immediate enemy out of what may be a very dangerous adversary. The possibility of error, in other words, does not force us to act on the assumption that the aliens are threatening. Action depends on the probabilities we assign, and these are in key part a function of what the aliens do. Prior to their gesture, we have no systematic basis for assigning probabilities. If their first gesture is to appear with 1,000 spaceships and destroy New York, we would define the situation as threatening and respond accordingly. But if they appear with 1 spaceship saying what seems to be "we come in peace," we feel reassured, and we will probably respond with a gesture intended to reassure them, even if this gesture is not necessarily interpreted by them as such. This is the process of signaling, interpreting, and responding that completes a social act and begins the process of creating intersubjective meanings. It advances the same way. The first social act creates expectations on both sides about each other's future behavior, potentially mistaken and certainly tentative, but expectations nonetheless. Based on this tentative knowledge, ego, or one state, makes a new gesture, again signifying the basis on which it will respond to alter, so the other state, and again alter responds, adding to the pool of knowledge each has about the other, and so on over time. The mechanism here is reinforcement. Interaction rewards actors for holding certain ideas about each other and discourages them from holding others. If repeated long enough, these reciprocal typifications or signals or examples will create relatively stable concepts of self and other regarding the issue at stake in the interaction. It is through reciprocal interaction, in other words, that we create and instantiate the relatively enduring social structures in terms of which we define our identities and interests. So that interpretation of the outcome of anarchy is extremely different to what the realists say. The realists say, if there is doubt, there is no doubt. You have to build up your weapons and maybe even attack, right? The realists think that you react to threats calculated on the other person's strength or growing strength, right? Whereas the constructivists here say that no, anarchy really has very little to do with it. It's the social constructs that are built up through this learning process. So, if, for example, if we were face to face, in a classroom, I would get you to play the Golden Balls game, right? Where you split or steal, and I would get you to play it 5-10 times, with different players, right? A new player each game. And so we have a bit of fun in the class, and we find out who's a stealer and who's a splitter, and that's a bit of fun. But the point I would be illustrating is that if we played it 100 times, 1,000 times, if we played it 100 times every time we met before the lecture, and you had to play with a different person each time before repeating, then there would be social learning that happens, and you would come to realize that some people are splitters and some people are stealers, right? Who can you trust? Who can you not trust? And it would be based on your previous experience with them in playing the game. Did they steal from you last time? Well, you'll probably respond by stealing next time, right? And vice versa. Did they split with you? Well, you're more likely to split with them, right? And especially if this communication is allowed and record keeping, then people would build up a sense of who to trust and who not to, right? So, even though it's an anaical system. So to understand what constructivists are talking about, it's very important to understand the definitions of the terms they're using, because they use certain terms in very specific ways. So I just want to run you through 8 of the key words that you need to understand the mechanics of constructivism, and I'll do them 2 at a time. So the first one is norms, and so these are not only what is normal, but there is a moral connotation to it, right? So this is where the logic of appropriateness comes from. That if you are developing norms, you are developing what is appropriate for that situation, right? So if I'm in a prisoner's dilemma game with Hitler, then my reaction, the logic of appropriateness will be based upon my knowledge of him. Whereas if I'm in a potential prisoner's dilemma with my mum, then there's really no prisoner's dilemma, because we trust each other and know what each other's going to do based upon our relationship and our lifetime of, well, my lifetime of knowledge of her. Right? The next one is institutions. So this is where these norms become very well known, very routine, and you can have formal and informal rules. So say a wedding, right? So there might be some formal rules. You have to sign a bit of paper, and you have to have a witness, and you have to say these words. But then there's also informal rules as well, that you wear white, or you have flowers, or I don't know what the informal rules are, but there's a mixture of these. But these institutions are really really strong norms. So if norms become generalized and become set, right, you can say that norm is really an institution, right? Because it has because it is so widely used, right? Next one's intersubjective meanings. So if something is objective, then it is external. It's not up for debate. It's the objective facts, right? Whereas if something is subjective, it is my subjective feeling or my subjective meaning. And inter means, so it's intersubjective. It means it's a meaning shared between 2 people. 2 or more people, but it has to be shared by someone. So if you have an intersubjective meaning, you have built a new meaning for something. So, for example, when I first met my wife, I was a little drunk, and after kissing her, I told her I loved her. And she said it's way, way, way too early to start using the L word. So I said, oh, all right, well, I'll use another word then. I'll use zebra, right? And so I used zebra instead of love. And so what I did there was change the meaning of zebra for me and my wife. And we still use it at dinner parties or things like that. Zebra still means, I love you, for us, not for anyone else. It's just an intersubjective meaning for us, right? Now, the next one is quite associated with this, is agency. Now, you have agents and actors, right? We are all agents or actors, and we all have a certain amount of agency. And agency is the power to change meanings for people, right? So I've got enough agency in the context of my relationship with my wife to change the meaning of zebra for us. And maybe I've changed it for you now, but probably not. You're not going to go saying zebra to each other, right? It's just it's a funny story. I haven't really changed the meaning of it for you because I haven't got enough agency in this context. Whereas Donald Trump has a lot of agency, right? Everyone's reading his tweets and following him in the news, and it's not whether you agree or disagree with him. It's that he has enough agency to change the meaning of things, the meaning of words. So, for example, fake news is now in the dictionary because of Donald Trump, right? He has added those words, put them together, and given it a certain meaning, and that meaning is now almost global, right? Most people in the world would have heard of fake news by now, because Trump has a great deal of agency to create these intersubjective meanings, right? So the next one is mutually constructed identities, and so this again is linked to intersubjective meanings and norms, right? And so what happens is we are constructing each other's identities all the time. Are you a friend or an enemy? Am I a friend or an enemy? So for example, during the American Revolution, where they broke away from the United Kingdom, if a US ship saw a British ship, then they would probably attack it without even going up the line of command or anything like that. A captain would either run away because they're too weak, or if they were stronger, they would probably attack, right? To either sink it as a warship or to confiscate its cargo, because their mutually constructed identities of each other were one of enemies at war, right? But 200 years later, you've got the mutually constructed identity of extremely close allies, right? They even call it the special relationship, right? So you've got not only a Anglo-Saxon dominated culture, but you have, the both fought against the Nazis, and they're on the same side in the Cold War, and they're extremely close allies, and so now, if a US warship saw a British flagged ship, there's no way that's possible that I can think of where that captain orders an attack on a UK ship, right? Like, it's just not possible. I mean, it's literally possible, right? Like, they could do it, but just from the chain of events that would have to happen for that to be socially possible, I can't even imagine it, right? Like, you would have to, the mutually constructed identities of close allies is so strong that I can't even imagine how it gets broken up, right? How those identities change now. There's too much history, right? The next one is practice, and so this is very closely linked in that practice are actions that follow a norm and at the same time produce the norm, right? So the actions of the UK and the US, in World War I and World War II and in the Cold War, that is the practice of being an ally. Every time you do something, it strengthens that identity, right? So let me give you an example. If I'm an astronaut, but I never go into outer space, am I actually an astronaut? Well, no, right? I might be training to be an astronaut, but to actually have the identity of an astronaut, I need to practice the action of being, going into space, right? Because the identity is constructed by that action and maintained by that action, right? If I'm a lecturer, but I've never given a lecture, I'm not really a lecturer, right? I might be training, or I might have the ambition of doing one day, but the identity is constructed and maintained by doing the action, doing that practice. So constructivists use this word practice in a very particular way, right? And so it's these practices that maintain norms and institutions and intersubjective meanings, and maintain these, mutually constructed identities. Okay, the next one is reflexivity between cause and effect. So in other more rational theories, there is a very clear connection between cause and effect, right? That is how they prove things. That is how they work out what is true, right? Whereas in a constructivist based theory, that relationship between cause and effect is much, much, much more complicated, right? Because you have this repeated sense of practice, which continually maintains or starts to alter identities, and identities are what make things appropriate, right? Is their identity an enemy, or is it a friend? And associated with that identity has a whole lot of appropriate behaviours, right? So there is a feedback loop that's happening that changes the idea of cause and effect, right? If the UK built a new set of nuclear submarines, right? The US, or say Australia, or France or something, would not be threatened by that. But the same action, it might cause some concern for, say, Russia, right? So the cause and effect is not clear, right? The next one is discourse, and particularly discourse analysis. And so discourse is an argument, right? It's not just talking, but it's actually contained in it, there's arguments, right? And what a discourse is it's trying to change the meaning of words or actions or identities, right? And so you will have reasoning or arguments, and that's how these things get changed, right? People give a reason for why this identity or this word or this action or this needs to change or should be changed or is this way. And so the winner of a discourse, a winner of that argument is the one who sets the meaning of things, right? And it depends upon the logic and the reason and the context, but also the agency of the people that are involved in that debate, right? So what constructivists do, particularly post-structural constructivists, they look at a lot of discourse analysis, right? So they're following the speeches of key players and looking at what are the meanings they're giving to things, what are the arguments they're making, right? Because the winner of the argument is going to be the one who changes the meaning. And when you change the meaning of things, you're changing reality, right? For socially constructed people, socially constructed race of people, right? People are confined by the meanings that they give to things, and we don't create those meanings. They are created intersubjectively. They're created by society, not just us, right? We might have enough agency to change zebra to I love you, but the rest of it, unless you're Trump or something, it's and even there, his agency is nowhere near absolute, right? So discourse analysis is research where you follow the patterns and meanings that are in key players' arguments. Okay, so just to go back to this idea of there's a reflexive relationship between cause and effect, right? There's also a reflexive, and reflexive means circular and a continual cycle, right? So there is a reflexive circular relationship between actors' identities, which and the identity they hold means it has a whole set of appropriate practices and actions linked to that identity, right? So if I'm your lecturer, it's appropriate for me to come up here, to set work for you and make rules and things like that. It's not appropriate for you to do it to me, right? And that's because I have the identity of a lecturer, and you have, in this particular context, you have the identity of a student. But if I met you in another context, I was at your work or something like that, those rules would not be appropriate, right? Those actions would not be appropriate, and there would be whole another set of appropriate actions. These actions, these practices are based on social norms, and they become a structure, right? That they are the mental walls inside a house. We can move in any direction we like, but the social norms create a structure. They create passages and doorways. They close some rooms off and open others, right? They literally sort of create the space in which we can move by making some things very inappropriate and some things appropriate and expected. So these intersubjective meanings and rules, we learn them, we become socialized, we learn them and become controlled by them, right? So practices create identities, but identities make practices possible. And so it's circular, right? Okay, so that's the definitions you need to understand social constructivism. Now let me give you some examples to hopefully cement that. So the first one, I'll just play you a little clip from The Matrix. I'm hoping everyone's seen it. If you haven't, I'm sure you've heard about it. The Matrix is people are stuck inside a computer program that replicates reality, and this clip is where Neo, the hero, starts to gain the power of changing that program. Okay.
Check him. He's gone. Goodbye, Mr. Anderson.
Neo, I'm not afraid anymore. The Oracle told me that I would fall in love and that the man that I loved would be the one. So you see, you can't be dead. You can't be. Because I love you. You hear me? I love you. Now get up.
No.
How?
He is the one.
So, if we were in a class setting, I would ask the class to discuss what did Neo do when he came back to life, right? But seeing how we're not face to face, I'll just cut to the chase. But so what Neo did there was he started to rewrite the rules of the Matrix, right? And so probably the greatest intersubjective meaning of all, so love, brings Neo back to life. Trinity and Neo changed the meaning of what it meant when you died in the Matrix. Before this, when people died in the Matrix, even though there was no physical damage to their bodies back in the real world, everyone died. But Neo changed the meaning of that. And his superpower was that he could change all sorts of rules in the Matrix. He could fly, he could stop bullets, he was super fast. He was able to change the meaning of things. And so now we are actually all Neos in that we can change the meaning of things. Right? I changed the meaning of zebra for my wife and I. I exercise some agency there. Another example I have is the breakup of the Soviet Union. Right? So a realist explanation for the breakup of the Soviet Union is done in purely material terms. Right? A realist would say the Soviet Union went broke. It was losing the war in Afghanistan. It couldn't afford to keep paying, bribing their states and keeping the whole thing together. The balance of power shifted dramatically between the US and the Soviet Union. And so Gorbachev and the leadership was suing for peace and trying to make peace with the United States and end the Cold War. And part of that process, trying to convince the US that they were no longer a threat, part of that process meant that they couldn't really send tanks and troops in to kill protesters and stop declarations of independence. And so the whole thing snowballed, and because at the heart of it, this balance of power and suing for peace meant that it confined the actions that Gorbachev was able to take, and so he wasn't able to crush the countries that were calling for independence, and so the Soviet Union broke up. But lots of countries go broke and they don't break up, right? Greece is broke, but no one's thinking that it's going to break up, or Ireland, in fact, half the developed world went broke in 2008, but no one was talking about the United States breaking up, right? So the constructivist explanation for why the Soviet Union broke up is that it broke up because people started to believe that it should. People started to believe that that was the appropriate thing to happen, all right? So people started going over the Berlin Wall and protesting, and not only that, but the soldiers and captains started to believe that maybe it wasn't appropriate to kill the protesters. Maybe they should let these protests go, right? And so this snowball effect changed enough people's ideas about the appropriateness of being in the Soviet Union to the point where declarations of independence happened in all these countries, right? And so the Soviet Union fell apart because people believed that it should, right? Whereas the United States goes broke and people still believe that there should be a United States, right? So there's a difference in explanation. The realists look at just the pure material terms, whereas the constructivists add this layer of belief, right? And that it's how people interpret things is what is the key. And so, different people have different amounts of agency, or the power to change the meaning of things, depending on the situation and depending on the person, right? So Gorbachev had a lot of agency towards the end, in the Soviet Union, and he was able to change the meaning of the US from an enemy to a non-enemy. Maybe friend is a little too strong, but why did he have that agency, right? Why did he have that power? It's because they had socially constructed a state called the Soviet Union, and it had rules and a leadership structure, and he had been, he climbed the ladder and got to the top, and so there he has the authority and agency to make those decisions. So once again, there's this circular loop between an actor's identity and the social structure that gives them that identity, right? So it's hard to, there's still a circular loop between cause and effect. Okay, so we've done the English school, and so that's that, and we've done conventional constructivism in this this lecture, and the main difference between the English school and constructivism is that you have much more detailed mechanics, and there's a faster change in norms. But it is explanatory. It's not normative, right? The constructivists aren't trying to make the world a better place. They're just trying to explain why things happened. Okay. Okay, so that's pretty well it for this lecture. But I just want to finish with a little bit of philosophy of science, because it'll help us understand things in the post-structuralist lecture that's coming up. So in the philosophy of science, they compare different theories by looking at what's called their ontology and their epistemology. And so ontology is the categories of things that are included in the theory, right? So theories are abstractions, right? They're a map, not a photograph, right? That they only give you the details that are important. And so how neorealism explains state behavior, right, or its ontology, so what the theory says is important, or the variables, right, is three things. Anarchy, states are the main actors and are functionally identical, right? So they're functionally identical in terms of their main goal is survival. And three, balance of power. So changes in the distribution of capabilities. These three things these three variables explain state behavior, right? And so these three things are what's called the ontology of neorealism. Now, how neoliberal institutionalism explains state behavior, or its ontology, is the same as realism's, right? Anarchy, states, and balance of power, but they add institutions, right? So yes, there's anarchy and states are the main actors, and there's changes in distributions of capabilities create openings or barriers for states' decisions, but you can add institutions that change the rules of the game from prisoner's dilemma to hopefully a cooperative outcome, right? Now, constructivism's ontology, right? What they include in their theory is the same as realism and neoliberal institutionalism, in that anarchy, states, balance of power, institutions, but they add norms and ideas and culture and identities, right? the social structure of the culture and that states are operating in. So if we call realism and neoliberal institutionalism, both of them are sometimes referred to as rationalism, and constructivism. Rationalism and constructivism have the same epistemology, and so epistemology is how do you prove that something is true, right? And so for all of these theories, they have a causal epistemology, right? So they're showing that X caused Y, right? So X being some combination of the ontological types, the variables, right? You know, change in balance of power or change in the ideas, right? That X causes Y being some outcome to be explained, right? And so how they do that normally, at least in international relations, is by showing that there is a connection between the process of decisions, right? So either you have detailed case studies or maybe large N correlations, right? You do regression analysis, something like that. But the important point I want you to take away is that the epistemology, how do they prove that X caused Y? There's a causal connection, right? Okay, so I'll leave it there for constructivism. Hopefully you found that interesting, and hopefully it's not too overwhelming. Explaining the detailed mechanics of constructivism can be a little bit hard to follow, and so I've tried to keep this lecture as bare bones as possible. But the next few lectures will also help sort of explain this stuff, especially the lecture on post-structuralism. So I hope you found that interesting. I hope you're safe and well, and I will talk to you in the next lecture.